Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP Vlogging Podcast. We do this ZP Vlogging Podcast every Sunday at 8 a.m. London time, and I will just jump into it. So, the Vlogging Podcast is really just about news from Zimmer and Peacock, things that we've put out into the public domain during the week. So, one of the things that we've done this week is if you ever Google biosensors, you'll actually find that either on the first or second page of, let's say, a Google search, you'll often find, sort of Zimmer and Peacock. And one of the things that you'll find is actually our Biosensors glossary. So we have a glossary of sort of definitions around really language and definitions within biosensors. So, what is a biosensor? For me, a biosensor is essentially a sort of a device which detects something of biological origin, but really biological origin can mean chemical, biochemical, biological, and it converts it into a signal. Now, for us at Zimmer and Peacock, that's often the signal is electrical, so we often convert biology, I would say, into electrons. Though you can also have biology converted into photons, for example. I obviously have a strong preference towards electrons. So a biosensor, we have a sort of definition for biosensor. Biosensors also sort of fall under a broad category of something called a transducer. A transducer, I would say, is more generic. So if I was looking for transducers, you could say a temperature sensor or a thermometer is a transducer. A balance or a weighing scale is a transducer, and a biosensor is also a form of transducer. So we do sort of define these things, and things like analyte. Analyte is that molecule that we're actually trying to detect. Recognition element. What does recognition element mean? An antibody is, for example, a recognition element. It allows you to specifically bind and therefore specifically detect a analyte, which is really interesting actually, because then it comes onto the term. Well, what is specificity? And actually, I'll make it harder to say what is specificity and what is selectivity. And specificity is really how specific are you to a particular analyte. So you want a glucose meter to be specific to glucose, whereas selectivity could say I have an analytical procedure like mass spectrometry, and actually I can detect many molecules, and what is my selectivity towards one particular molecule. Then there's terms like sensitivity, how strong is my signal to the analyte of interest. Calibration, how do I convert signal back into concentration? If it's a linear relationship, i.e. the higher the concentration, the higher the signal. Calibration is quite straightforward. It might not always be linear, let's say. So at Zimmer and Peacock, we do like to put a lot of information into the public domain, and I think sometimes people appreciate that, and we do get a lot of people coming to our pages around glossary on biosensor definitions. Some other news that we put out there this week, this is something I'm sort of super interested in actually, is MARD, mean average relative difference. So mean average relative difference wasn't invented for developers of and manufacturers of CGM or continuous glucose monitoring. It was invented for things like forecasting. But what it says is at any one time, what is the error between for example, my CGM and a blood glucose reading? And what you do then is for the mean average relative difference, you add up essentially all these errors and you divide it by the number of data points or number of observations you made, and that will give you your mean average relative difference. So it's a way of knowing how well you're correlating with something that you consider to be, I wouldn't say the gold standard, but a reference standard, maybe I could put it that way. So MARD is something that I'm pretty interested in. I might also do a different one, which is time in range, TIR, which some of my statistician colleagues argue that time in range is more useful than MARD, mean average relative difference. And I get it as well, because you can have gross mean average relative differences at some points, and actually later on it gets compensated for by having very good MARD. So you could actually, I don't want to be extreme, but somebody could be essentially very hypoglycemic, the reading says that they're hyperglycemic, that's a very bad error to be having. But later on, you could hide that error, not hide it, but it would get smoothed out by having some MARDs that were very good, if I can put it that way. So something else that we also do every Thursday at 8 a.m. London time, we always do our webinar for members of our ZP Developer Zone. So this week we talked about gas sensing, carbon monoxide versus nitric oxide. We talked about making electrical connections to gold sensors, sensors for soil, pH sensors, whether they worked at pH 2, readers for uric acid, screen printed electrodes or custom screen printed electrodes. We also talked about CGM technologies and lactate sensing technologies. We also talked about the long-term sustainability really of plastics in biosensors, and we also talked about methylene blue SPEs, screen printed electrodes. So I think it's every Thursday at 8 a.m. London time. We always talk about or we answer questions that come in from our communities and our collaborators, and we post them on the video. So we hope that is useful to people. Something else as well that we covered this week, just because it was relevant to some conversations, was ISO 15197. ISO 15197 is a standard that sort of says if you are developing an SMBG, a self-monitoring blood glucose meter, here are some standards against which you must meet in order to sort of be put onto the market. Now, we did actually link back to CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, because for CGM, I don't think there is an ISO standard. So everyone sort of, at the moment, is slightly adopting the SMBG standards, but eventually there will be a CGM standard also for the CGM technology. And when I think about it, it's because SMBG, there are many manufacturers, but in CGM, there's a dominant 3 manufacturers. So it's an easier market at the moment to kind of, for the regulators to keep an eye on. But I can understand that once the CGM market, there's a few more players, there'll have to be essentially an ISO 13485. Sorry, not ISO 13485. There'll have to be an ISO standard for CGM as well. But we did discuss ISO 15197 on our website this week as well. And something else that we touched upon this week as well, which is pretty close to my heart, is really MVP, minimally viable product. Minimally viable product, or minimum, I should say, viable product, is really a version of your product which has a minimum feature set that you could potentially give to alpha and beta testers or even customers, so that you can really get some customer feedback pretty quickly. It's a thing of, for us at ZP, but people wait too long sometimes to get that kind of customer feedback. So at ZP, we do try to very quickly help our collaborators and essentially our customers to get to an MVP stage pretty quickly, so that they can prove out that their technology is essentially usable or even liked by the end customers that they've identified. So if I was to summarize the week for the news from Zimmer Peacock for this week, we have covered biosensors and the definitions quite quickly, or quite a lot. Within that, I would actually say that MARD, mean average relative difference, is also something that we have covered this week. Also, of course, the ZP Developer Zone, these are specific questions that come in and we do answer them. We've also done some technical notes on ISO 15197, which is really about SMBG, self-monitoring blood glucose. And we've also talked about MVPs, minimally viable products. So if you have any questions of ZP, please reach out to us. If they're technical, we'll cover them in the weekly webinar on Thursdays at 8 a.m. London time. And of course, we will do our news vlog and podcast next Sunday at 8 a.m. London time. Otherwise, I wish you a good week, and I will speak to some of you soon. Okay, thanks very much.